Hello everyone, and welcome back to History Discussion, the channel where we dive deep into the stories that shaped America and the world. Today, let's talk about a turning point in our involvement in Vietnam. After the shocking Tet Offensive of 1968, the United States, for the first time, was forced to step back and sit at the negotiating table with North Vietnam in Paris. The Paris peace talks would go on to make history, not just because they aimed to end the war, but because of the battle of wits that took place before a single agreement was ever signed. After the Tet Offensive, America had to consider a diplomatic approach. We sat across from the North Vietnamese, who were led by the legendary diplomat Le Duc Tho, a man who had become world famous for his negotiation skills, even winning the Nobel Peace Prize for his role in these talks. To understand how these negotiations unfolded, we need to look at why Paris became the chosen battleground for words instead of weapons. Both sides knew that the location of the talks would play a huge role in the outcome. The United Nations stepped in as an intermediary, suggesting Paris from the start. But we as Americans actually preferred Geneva, Switzerland, an old friend and ally and a neutral ground. North Vietnam, on the other hand, pushed for Phnom Penh in Cambodia. Their reasoning? It was friendly territory, making it easier to gather intelligence and possibly influence the outcome. Back and forth it went. Dozens of proposed venues, none accepted by both sides. Finally, the UN stepped in, and Paris was chosen. For us, Paris was hardly unfamiliar. France had a long history with Vietnam, and we had invested heavily in France's post-war recovery. Besides, Paris was a global center, buzzing with diplomats and reporters. In our minds, negotiations there would be transparent, and whatever was discussed would quickly be known around the world. We thought that was to our advantage, but that confidence was, in a way, our first big mistake. We underestimated North Vietnam. We thought of ourselves as the experienced, wealthy power, going up against what we considered a much poorer nation, unfamiliar with high-stakes international negotiation. But the North Vietnamese were far from naive. They had many friends in France, political parties, youth movements, even major women's organizations. At that time, France had one of the world's most powerful leftist movements, all of which openly supported Vietnam. We spent months just choosing a location, but that was only the beginning. Next came the table, literally. Should it be rectangular or square? The answer mattered because it defined who was at the table and in what capacity. America wanted a two-sided rectangular table. Us on one side, North Vietnam on the other. North Vietnam argued that, since the negotiations were about ending the war in all of Vietnam, it should be four-sided, so both the National Liberation Front, NLF, and the Republic of Vietnam could participate. In the end, after heated arguments, we ended up with a round table. No head of the table, no sides. That might seem like a small detail, but in negotiations, symbolism is everything. And North Vietnam knew it. But the subtleties of the negotiation didn't stop with the shape of the table. For us Americans, it was a frustrating experience. North Vietnam challenged nearly every detail, from where people would sit, to what names would appear on the placards, to who could even be in the room. It became obvious that these weren't just trivial preferences. Each demand was a move in a complex chess match, designed to create leverage and shape global perceptions of legitimacy. One of North Vietnam's most strategic moves was pushing for a four-party format. From our perspective, the North was trying to elevate the National Liberation Front, the NLF or Viet Cong, to the same status as our ally, the Republic of Vietnam. We pushed back hard, fearing this would legitimize the NLF's claims. North Vietnam, however, argued that if the goal was a comprehensive peace, every relevant side needed to be heard. The table became round, and with that, the four parties sat together, symbolizing, at least visually, that no one side was above the others. Another critical point for us was the involvement of outside powers. North Vietnam was adamant that China and the Soviet Union stay away from the talks, and honestly, we understood their logic. They'd already experienced being outnumbered at Geneva years before, surrounded by superpowers with their own agendas. This time, they wanted to sit as equals with America, with no other giants in the room. Ironically, this also suited us because we preferred direct negotiation to a circus of outside interference. As the talks wore on, these battles of protocol and symbolism dragged out for months. The American side, led by Henry Kissinger, felt the frustration. Each session seemed to focus less on peace and more on technicalities. But to North Vietnam, every detail was a test of will, a sign of who would yield first and who would set the narrative for the world to see. This attention to detail is more than just historical trivia. It's a negotiation lesson. Even in everyday life, the position you take, the place you choose, and the way you frame a conversation can make all the difference. Just like a date where you sit at dinner or the activities you suggest can say a lot about who you are and what you want, so too does every detail at the negotiating table. If you're facing your date across the table, there's competition. But if you sit side by side, you're showing partnership. The same was true in Paris. By moving from a confrontational arrangement to a cooperative one, the talk started to shift ever so slightly toward compromise. As the Paris peace talks went on, American negotiators realized they weren't dealing with amateurs. The North Vietnamese, especially Le Duc Tho, showed a mastery of negotiation that surprised even seasoned American diplomats. It was no longer about who was stronger on the battlefield, but who could hold their ground across from the other at the table. So how did Le Duc Tho manage to challenge and even outmaneuver Henry Kissinger, one of America's best-known diplomats, during these historic talks? What lessons can we draw from their approach to negotiation, both for world history and our own lives? The answers and the dramatic story of what happened next will be revealed in our following episode. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss out on the rest of this eye-opening story, only here on History Discussion.